played in the World Chess Championship of 2024 in Singapore, Round 3, between Gukesh Dommaraju and Liren. The atmosphere was tense as Ding entered the round with a lead in the match, while Gukesh was determined to fight back and level the score. White begins with pawn to d4. Black responds knight to f6. White develops knight to f3. Black plays pawn to d5. Already we see both players contesting the center, which is the most important battleground in chess. White pushes pawn to c4. Black plays pawn to e6. White captures pawn on d5. Black recaptures pawn on d5. White develops knight to c3. Black plays pawn to c6. Both sides are building a solid pawn structure in the center, preparing to develop their pieces behind it. White develops queen to c2. Black pushes pawn to g6. White plays pawn to h3. Black develops bishop to f5. White develops queen to b3. Black responds queen to b6. White pushes pawn to g4. Black captures queen with queen takes b3. White recaptures with pawn takes b3. This exchange leaves white with doubled pawns but also opens lines for attack. Black develops bishop to c2. White develops bishop to f4. Black pushes pawn to h5. White develops rook to g1. Black captures pawn with pawn takes g4. White recaptures with pawn takes g4. The kingside is opening quickly, and white is aiming for aggressive play. Black develops knight to d7. White develops knight to d2. Black develops rook to g8. White pushes pawn to g5. Black retreats knight to h5. White develops bishop to h2. Black develops rook to h8. White pushes pawn to f3. Black retreats knight to g7. White develops bishop to g3. Black develops rook to h5. White pushes pawn to e4. Black captures pawn with pawn takes e4. White recaptures with pawn takes e4. Black retreats knight to e6. White develops rook to c1. Black captures knight with knight takes d4. White develops bishop to f2. Black develops bishop to g7. White develops knight to e2. Black captures pawn with knight takes b3. White develops rook to c2. Black captures knight with knight takes d2. White recaptures with king takes d2. Black retreats knight to e5. White develops knight to d4. Black develops rook to d8. White plays king to e2. Black develops rook to h2. White develops bishop to g2. Black pushes pawn to a6. White pushes pawn to b3. Black develops rook to d7. White develops rook to c1. Black plays king to e7. White develops rook to d1. Black plays king to e8. White develops bishop to g3. Black develops rook to h5. White develops knight to f3. Black captures knight with knight takes f3. White recaptures with king takes f3. Black develops bishop to d4. White develops rook to h1. Black captures pawn with rook takes g5. White develops bishop to h3. Black pushes pawn to f5. White develops bishop to f4. Black develops rook to h5. At this moment, white's pieces are perfectly coordinated, and black's defenses are collapsing. Strategically, this game shows how Gukesh used aggressive pawn pushes on the kingside to open lines and attack. Ding tried to counter with piece activity, but the repeated exchanges left his king exposed and his pawns weak. The critical moment came when white's pawns advanced with support from the rooks and bishops, forcing black into defensive moves that weakened his position. For beginners, the lesson is that pawn storms must be backed by piece coordination. Gukesh's attack worked because his rooks and bishops were ready to support, while Ding's knights and pawns became targets. Always remember that timing and coordination are key in launching a successful attack. Thank you for watching this analysis. If you enjoy this type of content and want to see more explained games, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss anything.